So good afternoon. I'm sure your brains are tired from a day and a half of like, okay, what else are we going to hear about? But I appreciate everybody coming back for day 2 of the coaching cycle pathways. You chose this pathway because coaching cycles were of interest to you, and so yesterday we decided to dive right into the coaching cycle pathway. But today we thought, we need to go back just a little bit because coaching cycles are often discussed on those days when you start to launch the coaching program with your teachers and the administrator with whom you're working. And so Suzy's going to share with us some of the key essentials of when you start to launch your coaching program, regardless of whether it's your first year or second year, because every year you want to relaunch and have teachers commit to the coaching program in the school. And so we thought we'd take just a few minutes to talk about that launch and how the discussion of coaching cycles might fit into that launch.
Thank you, Susan. And I know as we reflected on your questions, quite a few of the questions revolved around what is the right way to launch? How do we explain what coaching is, what it isn't? And so please, I just want to share, this is one example that I have used with a school this past school year. I do want to make sure that credit goes to the Kalamazoo RISA team because as I developed a coaching launch 6 years ago, I met with them and we got some really great ideas from them. And so that helped to start, I'm going to come back here, that allowed us to start with this, but then to adapt and change it over time. And I hope you know every year I add something different because for me it's really important, even though I've been coaching in the same buildings for 3 years now, it's really important. People might be at a different place for what whether they're open to coaching. Maybe last year they weren't as open to coaching, and so they might be at a different place to see coaching as an opportunity. And so I think it's really important to launch every year, but again, what I hone in on might be different based on how long I've been with that school and knowing staff turnover and so forth. So this is one example. Thanks again to the KRISA team. And John, if you could just click on that link for me. Should be linked right in there. There we go. So we'll do a slideshow within a slideshow here. So yeah, if you just go, there probably is. If you just go up to slideshow, John, in the right corner there. Okay. And so this is one of my buildings, Congress Elementary in Sturgis. So if you want to go to the next slide, again, I just give them my contact information. I share a little bit about myself. Here's me, this is me outside of work, and just some things about myself, just so they can get to know me as a person as well. Next slide, please. Oliver's not in that. I need a new updated picture, Susan, thank you for that reminder of that. Oliver is not in there. And usually because I've been with this building and we didn't have any new teachers, the next slides tell me about you. But because that what did not happen that school year, there was not a change in staff, I go right to the why. So there's the literacy coaching model, making sure they're aware. I do have a video linked. And really, it just goes and explains the coaching model. Now, when I have a building for the first time, sometimes I share that, but I think now coaching has been, coaching is more relevant and people are more aware of coaching. But when we first started in like 2006, people are like, what is this and why are you doing this now? And so I felt like that video really helped to explain the coaching model. It's just about a 3-minute video. So a short little synopsis as to the why behind coaching and the reasons why I will be doing what I'm doing with them for the research-supported practices. Next slide, please. I go ahead and then I just take a minute to be quiet and I allow them to read the definition of instructional coaching according to Jill Jackson. That was the model that we first learned, like I said, about 6 years back from the KRISA team. And so this was a quote from Jill Jackson. So I simply just take a minute to be quiet, let them read. But then, of course, I try to ask them, what are some words that stand out to you around instructional coaching? And, of course, I make sure to highlight what is highlighted there. And it's something we firmly believe at our ISD, that everyone needs and deserves coaching. So we want everyone to know that it's for everyone, not just for certain people. Next slide. This is, again, just showing that partnership between the principal and the teacher, the coach and the teacher, but it's just trying to highlight that, yes, the principal and the coach will be talking, but we don't share that individual information, just to make sure that those teachers are aware that they can trust the process. You try to do it something funny, what happens in the classroom stays in the classrooms. We say it's kind of like the Vegas rule, right? But these are things that coaches do and what we do not do, just so they can kind of start to learn about what are those things that we do, and to, again, trust that over time, things with the principal, we're not going to be sharing that individual information. Because really a launch is all about transparency. It's about telling them what it is, and it's not, I'm not trying to keep a secret from them. And I really do think it helps with relationship building too. If I've been as transparent as possible, they're gonna know what to expect. And I think that really helps with rapport and relationship building as well. Next slide, please. This might look familiar to you because this is the document that Susan had us look through. Because I've been with this building for 3 years now, I wanted to try to get a little bit more around the partnership. And so what I did was I simply took a moment to allow them to look at this document and really just to think about what those commitments and communication will be and the role both of us play. We will never get to that goal that they want unless we both play that important role of collaborating and contributing to the coaching cycle. Next slide, please. And again, this is getting back to Jill Jackson's model. She to put coaching into 4 different buckets. And so again, this is allowing when teachers aren't sure, like, what do I even have you, what could we even coach around? These could just give them different ideas into buckets as to what you could do. Classroom systems and structures, student engagement. Number 3, lesson planning and preparation. And of course, I always try to make a link to the our essential practices. And so that's why that's linked right there. And then as well as lesson delivery. And so just showing them that we can have different focus areas as well, and what's important to be thinking about in regards to classroom instruction. Next slide, please. And this is just simply to show them what a coaching cycle can look like. How we start with the pre-conference, identifying that goal. We then move into in-classroom sessions, and then the power of the debrief. As we know, and as Susan has mentioned, the power of having that conversation and that reflection time. And you'll notice that these arrows, right, because we might be doing different things, right? It's not the first time you go in, we did something together and they're like, bye, now we're done, right? When we talked about that question of how do we keep it going, this could really show them that we're not just gonna have one opportunity, we're gonna have different ways to help us get toward that goal. And hopefully that will showcase that as you explain what the coaching cycle is. There's a link at the bottom. I simply just give them a cheat sheet, and it has those 3 areas, and there's even questions that they can think of before we have that. If they're like, what's the point of this meeting, or what are we doing during this time? So it's a helpful little cheat sheet. I know teachers have appreciated that, so then they can come into the space thinking about things that they want to prepare before we have that conversation and that time together.
This is the Jill Jackson model of the in-classroom sessions, but if you have a different model that you're using, you'd modify this to fit the model that you're using. I noticed yesterday when we looked at resources, Jill Jackson's there, the impact cycle by Jim Knight, student-centered coaching by Diane Sweeney. So you're going to change some of this to fit whatever coaching model your school, your ISD is using.
Thank you for that addition, Susan. And honestly, every year we've adapted and improved it every year, because that's as we get better, we want to make sure we're also showcasing that as well. So, all right, next slide, John. You might see a lot of similarities with our identified coaching activities on essential coaching practice number 6. But again, these are the buckets, the different instructional coaching styles, observation, as we refer to as modeling, or excuse me, observation. Number 2, demonstration, as we refer to modeling. And then a couple extra layers of side-by-side, co-observation, and shadowing. Some people say, what is shadow? I think I've done it one time total. So you are going to notice down here, along with co-teaching, conferencing, and co-planning. So as we go and change this year, we really want to try to adapt this slide to really hit more of our coaching activities that are listed in our coaching practices. But I hope you can see the connections that are embedded with what's already on there for the various instructional coaching styles that we can do based on a goal. Anything Asha or Susan you'd like to add? All right, next slide please, John. So then usually people look at me and they're like, okay, so that's great, Suzy. I know about a coaching cycle. I can kind of know what to expect. But I don't know what to really focus on. So then I just simply list some possible focus areas that they might consider. Of course, first and foremost, I'll always put the essential practices with a link right to the website there. And then again, we might be analyzing assessment data to inform whole group, small group, or individual instruction. Maybe we're looking at classroom literacy environments. I had a few teachers that are going through the letters learning, and so I said that could be a possible connection that we could have as a goal. We could co-plan an upcoming lesson together, or possibly receive support around the principal's instructional goal. So it's just giving them some ideas if they're not sure what we could spend time learning around together. Next slide, please. With this school in particular, then what I do is I highlight what the principal's instructional goal is. So the principal and I already sat down and met. The great thing too is he helped me give this presentation, so he had different slides than I did, so we show the partnership from the principal as well. That didn't happen the first year, but now by year 3, he has a better understanding of what coaching is and isn't as well. But his big goal was around database decision making, and so these were just some different areas of time that I knew I'd be supporting teachers. And then of course we also had the couple years before, we had Essential 3 and 9 as our focus. What data is leading to what we're doing in small group? And so just giving them just a reminder of what that principal's instructional goal is, as well as focus we've done in the past. Next slide. And then I simply just try to end by just some key takeaways. I hope they realize that we can have a coaching cycle with small groups or individual teachers. Again, hopefully they understand the premise of what a coaching cycle contains. I hope they know that we're going to have a partnership together, and it's going to be unique based on what they need and what their goal is. And then I simply just add a few different links. A lot of teachers want to know, when are you going to be in the building? So there I try to put dates, knowing that I will update that document as well. I have them do a quick survey, like, now that we went over this, do you have some ideas for possible focus areas? What may be your preferred time to meet? Do you like lunch and learns? So I try to gather as much information, and rather than sending them an email later that they have to try to go back to, I try to give them 5 minutes right then and there to complete that survey, fill out that information, so then as I'm doing my planning for coaching, I have all that information that I can refer back to as well. And then I just hope that they know that I really look forward to working alongside them for the students at that school in particular, with my contact information again. So a short and sweet. Sometimes principals always ask me, how much time do you need? I always say, how much time can you give me? All right, I can take as little as 10. I'll take as much time as you give me, So I always appreciate, though, every year I launch, and the principals are really supportive of that, because they also, now that we have gone through some coaching years together, they see the power and the importance of launching it out in a way that people are aware of what it is, for transparency, and again, just so they know what this work is all about and how we can partner together.
So I could be the rover. I think we only have one thing, but other people who have been in coaching for a while have their own launch system. So are there a few people that would like to share how their launch system might be similar or different? Some new ideas other than the ones that Suzy had that you might want to incorporate into your launch system?
So this is actually only my second year coaching, but I just had an idea that might be a good idea, so I wanted to share it. Okay, so we always talk about, at least I do, about you want people to be like your spokesperson or your billboard or whatever. Like people that I coached with last year that had great experiences, having them say a quick something to kind of advertise you and how wonderful and great the experience was.
Kind of like the panel today for the intensives. If you haven't been intense, this is your time.
Same thing. A thank you to people at Weirenga because it really is a network. But like they've shared some vision and missions with us, and we were working on creating that over the summer, creating a vision and a mission for what it looks like. And we're meeting with administration to say, are we on the same page? Do you agree with these vision and mission statements? And then that's something that you could maybe add to the slides.
We used in Jill Jackson's Get Some Guts coach, there's a nice like coaching is and coaching isn't. And so we typed those up and cut them out, and each group had to sort them, and we had them actually color code it with a sticker so that if it was like a do, they put an orange one on, and like if it was a don't, a blue. And then we kind of went through some of those and at the end have them recode so they could see if any of their thoughts shifted after we talked about what our roles were in that building. And then we collected them, and what was really nice is we could look and see where the ideas shifted and if they shifted the correct quote unquote way or not. And then that would help us clarify anything that would be needed in the future for our building to kind of wrap their brain around like what coaching truly is expected to be versus what maybe it had been in the past.
So in your brain, you know what page number that is?
I do not. I do not, but yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
And how did you collect? Like, did you have them tape it onto something with their new vision so you had that order?
So it was literally like, sorry. So it was like a tiny piece of paper that said collaborative. So they'd say like coaching is collaborative. They put an orange dot, and then they just put all of their little pieces of paper back in the envelope, and we collected the envelopes. And then the sticker was on that little tiny paper. Nope, they just added it next to it so we could see that their thought changed. So like some might have blue and blue or orange and orange, so their thought stayed the same, and some might have like orange to blue or blue to orange. So we could see some themes of what was unclear. We could also hopefully see some shifts in thinking after our presentation for the better. But coaching was seen more as like a resource. I ask you a question, you answer my question, I ask you for help, you find the resource, and that was kind of it. And so we wanted to really make it more about cycles and individual stuff.
Thank you.
We did something very similar to what you said about the sort, but we started our presentation and said, before we start on this sticky note or on this index card, write what you think coaching is. And then we did our very similar presentation to Suzy's. Within it, we did the sort and then talked about it. And then at the end, we said, flip your card over now and tell us how your thoughts have changed. And that's what we were able to collect, short and sweet, to see how their minds had changed or grown. But they loved the sort. Like, that was like a fun activity.
Trying to make it a little more interactive, you know, especially some people like, you do the same launch every year. Doesn't that get kind of boring for the people who've been there from the first launch to the second to the third? And again, I try to add different layers. And again, I think about the staff that's there, and has there been a lot of, you know, turnover and so forth. But again, we can adjust it and make it better every time. So thank you for sharing those great ideas. Anyone in the back? Okay, we got one and then two.
I've been a tech coach for 10 years now. This is my 10th year. And I'm also now the literacy coach for the second year. And I typically do like a PD at the beginning of the year. And I'll launch it that way. I like to give a little gift bag, kind of like goodie bag, if you will, that has like a few treats in it, and also has like a instructional coaching menu that I've created. So like appetizers, you know, different things, the main course, main entree, dessert. And so I can share that out if you'd like, but it basically has all the different ideas of why you would sign out an instructional coach. This past year, what I did when we did the launch was I did something called the Gripe Jam. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it is a sticky note based thing where they are going to write down anything either centered around a theme, which this year we did our curriculum for reading, and we went ahead and they wrote down any struggles or thoughts that they might have as far as like something that might be a concern to them. And they wrote all these down, and then we organized them by most important or most impactful to least impactful, and then they organized it for impact the most people or to least people. And then from there, they were able to identify like some really key ones they wanted to focus on. And then they shared that information with me into a Google form, which then in turn I got to look back at and say, okay, this is something that I need to look at you and maybe sit down with you and have maybe a coaching conversation about, so we can maybe come up with a solution together, or maybe work on this to provide more resources toward. But the Gripe Jam is something you can find online if you just do a quick Google search. But yeah, and another thing that I do in my district is something called Modeling Workshop, which I don't know if you've heard of, but it's basically like you focus with a team of teachers. I usually do a full grade level. We find like maybe a standard or topic that we want to focus in on, and it can be something that they're working on that week even. And then what we do is maybe a couple days later, we go ahead and identify a teacher that's going to teach that lesson, and everybody else observes. And then we all have like a role in that when we're observing. What kind of things are we looking for? So we identify look-fors ahead of time. Might be student engagement, might be conversation, it might be the technology that we're using, for instance, that they're concerned about. And then the next day we meet, or even directly after the lesson, we'll meet and debrief. And so that's like a really good way, a different way of coaching cycles, but modeling and observing. And they like that a lot.
And I think we could probably share so many great different examples. Melissa, was there anything online? Or I know there was one last hand, but I know we also want to make sure we move forward. But it's so hard, such great conversations. And thank you for sharing those great ideas.
What's that? The question is to share?
Yeah, you had said you'd be willing to share. Since we're going to be a collaborative group and some of us are new, it would be really nice for us to see the modeling piece, see what you guys have created and make it our own, but work smarter, not harder.
So kind of like a resource folder.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that we will develop a resource folder for this group. I think that this kind of a activity, the lesson study that you talked about, is like on the pathway toward a coaching cycle, right? It's maybe considered a mini coaching cycle or something like that, so that maybe you're talking about certain part of that curriculum, and one of those teachers is saying, I need more examples, I need more support in implementing this, and so it moves into that coaching cycle. As opposed to lesson study is very powerful. You call it something else.
We called it the modeling workshop because
Modeling workshop.
the three-step process of identifying and then modeling. The showcase is what we call it.
Okay. Oh. So whatever you call it, lesson study, modeling. So I think that we're always looking for ways of moving from what you're doing with a group or with a teacher in a very small set into a more sustained duration of coaching cycles. What we wanted to move then from the launch, and it's interesting. So I don't know if this is a Michigan thing or the principal's instructional goal. So a principal has an instructional goal that he or she does not formulate, like with the leadership team. Is that true? Or is it the principal's goal because he or she has formulated it with the leadership team?
Yes, especially with my KIP, it's really more, this was the district goal from that building in particular, was around database decision making. And what am I doing as the coach to help support that district-wide goal for the teachers?
So I think that when Tanya was talking yesterday about 70% of the work that the report says that teachers volunteer for coaching, focusing on the school improvement plan goal or on a new curricular resource that you're using can get away from that volunteerism piece. It can get into what are we as a school collective responsibility for our students, by focusing on this. Now, when you're focusing on writing, what part of writing are you focusing on? Everybody doesn't have to be doing opinion writing, or everybody doesn't have to be doing narratives, but we're to improve writing instruction is maybe your MyKIP goal. And then what, as a teacher or as a grade level, are we going to work on? Or if we have a new curricular thing, like, sometimes it's just, what are we doing? What are the essential parts of this curriculum to get done this first year? And how are we collecting data about what's difficult for us and what we need to work on in the next year? So I think that getting away from sometimes just having an individual menu about how I can help you, getting into, okay, the school's goal this year is this. Now, in terms of that, what can I help you with individually? So we're moving into more of that collective responsibility. So I think that what we had hoped was that people would kind of now we've kind of forgotten about yesterday, and we're going to try and bring you back to yesterday and just kind of take a walking gallery walk of all the nice charts that people had, get you up and going a little bit. And you might want to take a pen with you, or we've got markers here. If you really like something about it, just put a star next to it. One, we didn't even see this rules of the road. I just love the idea of this graphic. I don't think I've intensely internalized every word on it, but visually it's really striking. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to go read that. It catches my eye as a teacher. I'm going to read that. And so I just, we've placed them around the room. Just take a few minutes just to saunter around, and we'll see your best sauntering style. And be sure to make a mark or a comment. What we'll do is afterward we will take pictures of these and maybe put them in the resource folder or come back to them and revise them at some time. But just get up and take a saunter and feel free to write. Okay. Thank you for taking the gallery walk and adding stars to things and notes. There were lots of little fun things that I hadn't seen yesterday when I was looking. So this is an article from the Reading Teacher that Erin and I wrote a while back, and we wanted to have you read just 201 and 203 about what does it mean to participate in a coaching cycle. And these are some of the things you might say, talk to teachers. Remember yesterday you built these around what, if a teacher asked you, what is a coaching cycle? This is the kind of thing that you were going to develop a piece that you could share with a teacher. And so now I want you to read 201 to 203 so that you can affirm that on your charts you have a lot of good things already there. But I also want you to think about, is there anything here that was interesting to you that you might consider adding to your chart or to your discussion about what does it mean to participate in a coaching cycle? So if you would just take the time to read that one section on pages 201 to 203 and star any new ideas or underline or however you mark up your reading about new ideas are important things to remember. Okay. We know that everybody's silent reading rate is not exactly the same, but it looks like many people are at least toward the end of the article, toward that section. And before we go on, I just wanted to mention that I think that article excerpts or book excerpts are a really good thing to use during professional learning, short, because you know how tired you are right now, and your teachers at 3:30 in the afternoon or 4:30, whenever your professional learning is, are just as tired. And so if you can just find the kernel of what you want to talk about and ask them to read a couple of pages, that's better than, well, here's the whole article, get as far as you can. or sending it out a week before and saying we're going to discuss it, because then you've got half of your people come, they have been diligent, they've got their marks, everything is coded, and half of the people still haven't even opened their documents. So that's very hard to then decide what you're going to do for professional learning. So unless you're doing a book study where people are committed to doing the reading, and even then you have people who life happens and it doesn't get done. I think having really small snippets to read is really beneficial, as opposed to as opposed to the whole article or the chapter or whatever you're reading. So I'd just like to hear from a few people about any new ahas that these 2 pages gave you about how you're going to talk to teachers about a coaching cycle. New things in there that you thought, oh, I might have heard of this before, but I haven't thought about it recently, or I want to remember this. Is there anybody?
I just liked on page 202 how it did say, as part of the implementation phase, that teachers might feel more comfortable teaching some lessons prior to that observation. I've often just been more sequential on the practice and wrapping up the cycle than allowing them that time to get comfortable and then coming back later. And then how much time would you give, by the way?
Well, I think that, we're looking at that gradual release. So you might, the first time, co-plan that lesson together, and the teacher might say, I got it. I'm going to go teach that and see how it goes for me. You could have a conversation afterward for the teacher about how did it go for you, if you wanted to. So maybe you co-plan a couple lessons, and then the teacher plans her own lesson and tries it on herself, and then maybe 2 lessons later, or whenever the teacher feels comfortable, says, I think I got it. I'm ready to have some feedback now on this. So I think that works, and you just have to feel for how many times the teacher wants to do it before you come in, knowing that observation is going to be there at some point. Okay. Anything? Yeah.
I appreciated the reminder to kind of set all the dates for each phase of the cycle up front to help with organizing and things like that, but also to kind of show that commitment to each other by having it already on your calendar.
And this gets to a lot of the questions that you had about, how often should you meet and everything. It depends on your focus, right? So, if you're working on on small group lessons, probably you're going to be in that room every single day for however many days it takes until you get to the end of that coaching cycle. And you can estimate it out, say it's flexible, but I see this, by the time we look at the student data and I model and you try it out and everything, we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks here, and I'm going to be here every day. Now, of course, that takes some time with those of you who have 2 or 3 schools, and we have got to talk to administrators. It about drives me nuts that we have not that when people are contracting with ISD coaches, I guess it's the ISD administrators and the principals, not principals, but the superintendents we have to talk to, is that, okay, we want 23 days and we want to coach in our room, in our buildings once a week. Okay, don't bother. It's not going to lead to any results. So forget it. But if you can have 23 days in this school to get some coaching cycles going, and then 23 days in this school, and then 23 days in this school, you could actually have an impact on the teacher practice and student learning. So this idea of, we want the coach to be seen in the building. Is that going to lead to student improvement? Don't think so. So, unless I'm just so dynamic, students watch me walk through the building and all of a sudden their IQ goes up 8 points, and I don't know. But anyhow, so I'm glad you brought that up. So I think setting those dates says a lot of time, and you may need to really think about that. It might be too late for this semester, but for next semester, maybe think about that a little bit more. Was there one more aha we wanted to talk about today? Sorry, I didn't mean to. Was there something that you wanted to share from the article? Or? So the only other thing is just this really emphasis on acknowledging adult learning principles that teachers want it to be relevant to their work. So if you have a global school goal, what they do has to be relevant to their students. And also that they want to be very involved in the planning and evaluation of their own work. So make sure that it's as collaborative as possible when you set up your coaching cycles. And just this last thing on page 202 in the middle about having the teacher be able to state what it is we're going to work on in one sentence. And I always say to teachers, so if your colleague in the next room says, what are you and the coach working on? The teacher is able to say, give an elevator speech about, we're working on helping our students with phonics instruction, and we're expecting 90% of them to be able to do this by the end of our work together. So that you're sure that that teacher and you are on the same path in terms of shared understanding about your work. So that's just a little part of this article, and it just reaffirms there were a lot of things about diagrams, and that's why we had you do all these diagrams. So I hope that this really solidifies the launch, how coaching cycles could be part of that launch, how you can talk to teachers about coaching cycles, what teachers need to know. And then I think we're going on, if I can remember, to elements of the coaching cycle. Almost all of these places, a lot of people really like. I don't know which table did this one, but this is a great data chart. The only thing that we thought was missing was the refueling. You know, if you're going to go into another data chart, or if your implementation trail is a long one, you might need a little trail mix shack. And that wasn't my idea, it was somebody else's idea, but great idea. So we wanted to look at these coaching activities, and we want you to think about and share with us your ideas as well, but we'll start it off with why might this part of the coaching cycle be difficult, and what can we do to make it less difficult? Okay, so we're taking each one of those, but as we're talking, think to yourself and think, oh, I have a great answer for that. So we'll
Start with Asha first. Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay. Do you want this or want me to?
You could click it. I think I have the first. Yeah, the second. So when we think about the goal setting stage, it's imperative for us to reflect on what are some of the things that might be difficult for our teachers at this stage. And many times, one of the things that might be difficult is just narrowing the focus when there are multiple needs that need to be addressed. So they might have a really broad picture of all the different things they want to work on with the student, with their students during this cycle. But we want to be there to support narrowing down their focus. They might have limited knowledge of student literacy learning. So we want to be thinking about making sure that we support them with really knowing their students where they are, what the current state is, and what the desired state. You'll see that in No More Random Acts as well, that template around goal setting. And it's a template that you can use with goal setting. And it helps you to strategically think about with your teachers, where are they currently, where are the students currently, and what their desired state might be. So how might we address it? First, carefully analyzing our student strengths. So when we're thinking about what we know about our students, where did they start? And then we're thinking also about where they need to go. So let's narrow it down to one specific learning target, when we're going through each stage. We want to make sure that it's not so large, but we're paying attention to the next best step for our kiddos. So choosing one teaching point or one learning target, narrowing that focus, knowing where our students are. And then you might, with your teachers, spend some time debriefing any professional learning. that you have, so they can have a clear picture of what the instructional practice looks like in action, right? So if you're trying to really narrow down that that desired state, you know, have you looked at some videos together? Have you talked and reflected on the last professional learning? Have you been in some teacher labs and seen, have they seen what this practice looks like? From the article that Susan just stated, you know, when we're setting a goal, we should be able to be explicit about what the teacher's instructional practice is going to look like for the help of that student. So we're thinking about specifically summarizing, reflecting on the student learning, making sure we have a clear picture in mind of what instructional practice should look like and what the student shifts will be, student outcomes. And co-plan.
So if you're looking for one of the questions that we had, several people said, what are some resources? On page 59, there is a goal setting template. And it may not be your perfect goal setting template, but it might be a place to start. And so you're asking that teacher, what does your current practice look like? What do you want it to look like? And how can we get there? So we have a template for most of these activities. They, again, map them against how you usually do your goal setting and change the template or develop a totally different one. But just to give you some ideas about what could be included in that template. Is there anybody else who has some ideas about things that have helped your goal setting, help you to set goals with a teacher, either about a coaching cycle or about any other work that you're doing with them? I need steps.
One thing that we did that was helpful when a team of teachers were just had a broad idea of what they wanted, like phonological awareness, we used the self-assessment that's part of the essentials to have them sort of self-assess and then see where they felt, where in common the team felt they all wanted to work, and that kind of helped, you know, our focus.
That's why we have so many different groups of people here to remind us of really good ideas and of how we can use the essentials, and getting to that point that Asha was talking about oftentimes our goals are way too broad and we can never reach them because we don't really know what they are. So that's a hint from the field that's terrific. Others? You could do that with any essential practice, you know, to narrow it down a little bit. Suzy.
Thank you for that reminder about that self-reflection guide as well. So if I could ask you, do you mind pulling out your essentials booklet? And I'm going to have us go specifically to the coaching essentials. So I'll give you just about a minute to get that out. Helps to ground us in our work and why we are doing the things we're doing. So I'll give you a second to get that out. If you could go to page 65, we're going to focus in on essential coaching practice number 6. So again, on page 65 of our new booklet, love our new booklet. And once you get to page 65, if you could just take about 1 minute to read the co-planning section in particular. And when you're finished reading, if you could just look up to show me that you're finished reading. Take about 5 more seconds, please. All right, so that is what research says specifically about co-planning. But why might co-planning be difficult? Especially if you look at bullet 2, maybe bullet 2 really stood out to you as you were reading the co-planning section about everything that's involved with bullet 2. Ensure that instructional planning includes delineating learner outcomes, selecting appropriate practices, determining grouping options, and developing outcome-based assessment. That's a lot of teacher knowledge necessary, as well as the planning time necessary. So that might be a reason why it might be difficult. Also, that 4th bullet around having appropriate assessment data to reach and teach the instructional needs of our students. So if you go to the next slide for me, please. So how might you address the difficulties related to co-planning? I know someone already lifted from the article in particular, determining those times to meet with the teacher so you have the adequate time needed for co-planning instruction together. That bullet 2, remember that really big bullet, collaboratively set those clear outcomes, grouping options, and teaching strategies for the lesson. And really being thoughtful of assessment from the start to the finish, your plan for assessment with that teacher. And so there, as Susan referenced, there are multiple templates. You could utilize the goal setting template in your co-planning to think about what that might look like. Was there another one that was, and there's a co-planning template on page 62. So there's just another example for you as to what you might utilize as a template for co-planning lessons with a teacher. So there is a resource for you, but as we did with the first around goal setting, is there anyone who'd like to share an example of what they do for co-planning that really helps you to make sure that's an important part of the coaching cycle?
It's interesting, about 6 people here. So of those people who have co-planned, about how much time do you find that it takes to co-plan the first lesson that you co-plan with them versus the 4th or 5th lesson? Who can respond to that? Or, oh, Cody?
So I did some co-planning last year with a teacher, and the principal gave us a half day to plan a couple of lessons, and that took the half day. But once we got those routines and procedures in place, it took less time, probably about an hour or hour and a half. So, yeah.
So one of our, and it depends. What was the focus of your work?
Well, we worked on productive group work strategies because she did not feel comfortable with letting her students loose to do productive group work. She was very controlling with her students, so we worked on some routines and procedures and processes for that.
So you could see where that could take a lot of time. And obviously this principal was knowledgeable enough about what was going on in that classroom that it was valuable enough to have him or her, whichever the principal was, bring in somebody to run that classroom while they could meet. Because this, you don't have those routines down. It doesn't matter what you're standing up there teaching, it's not going to happen. The students aren't going to get anything. So that is a major co-planning thing that does take time. And so you have to think about that.
I was just going to offer a different perspective. One was just around interactive writing, so a much smaller task. And we, as a group of 4 teachers and I, looked at the planning document that we were going to use and kind of generally talked as the 4 of us as part of professional development, and that session was an hour. And then we were able to plan the lesson because it had that in about 20 minutes for each one of the teachers. So it was a much smaller, focus. So
So the benefits of doing some of that work together with a whole grade level or a whole team that's working on the same thing, and then breaking it down into individual coaching can help with that time span. So really great ideas. I knew you guys had good ideas. Just your arms are so tired after working all day. Okay, who's next?
So oftentimes we actually think as coaches that the modeling stage is the easiest because, you know, you've done a professional learning or something, and then you just can go in and model lessons for teachers as they request you. But there might be some things that are difficult about the modeling stage. And one is if the coach and teacher miss the opportunity to really discuss specific aspects of the lesson that they're going to be watching for, that the teacher will be watching in the modeling session. And also, it could be difficult if the observation of the model lesson is just too broad. There's no structure or a instructional guide or observation guide that has been developed, so that you can really, that teacher can really focus in on the key aspects that are going to help them with their instructional shift or with their student learning outcomes. So, of course, how might we address it? We want to make sure that we are intentional about setting purpose for modeling. You know, so even if you have done a PL, if you're going in one-on-one with a teacher, you know, making sure that you take that time to have a conversation with them about the purpose for modeling that lesson, discussing what the learning standards and lesson ideas might be prior to going into modeling. And then there has to be some specificity with the teacher observation. So maybe together you develop an observation guide with that teacher. And all of these ideas are in a template in No More Random Acts of Coaching on page 61. But it does give some questions that you could walk through with your teacher and ask them to think about together. You're thinking about all of those different sections as you're planning to model. So we're not just going in and shooting from the hip when we're modeling, but we're making sure it's really strategic. Anyone want to add any of your thoughts around modeling? Oh, got a hand up already.
Okay, so I have heard, this is now, like I said, my second year of coaching going in, that sometimes people say, beware of modeling, because sometimes teachers just want you to model because they want someone to do the lesson, or they want a break, something like that. They want to grade their papers. So the first time I went into model for a teacher, I had the aha moment that I'm going to create a look for document when I come back, so that when she is here, I know she's listening because she's writing about me and her look for document, and I'm providing it for her. So I'm obviously comfortable with her doing this. And then we would debrief afterwards in like one of her planning periods, and we talked about the look fors and what she saw. And I'm very open, and always, there's teachers who are more comfortable than others. Some will sit on the floor with the kids like they're a student, and they're raising their hand and asking questions as the students typically would, noticing things that are happening in the lesson because they're wanting to learn as well. And so the kids find that pretty cool, but they're noticing it through looking at those noticings and look fors, that things kind of come to their mind, and then there's a space for them to jot down notes and ideas. So that keeps them kind of engaged as well. And knowing that, we're going to be coming back and talking about this. So it's not just, hey, I'm going to sit here and have a break or leave the room for a minute. So.
Right. We want to make sure they're actually observing doing a model lesson, and that we're not getting into the routine of just model, but they have a clear picture of the whole cycle, and that, they're going to be taking some of this knowledge that they've learned from modeling and applying it maybe into their co-teaching or into the next phase of your cycle if the coach is now observing while the teacher is putting the implementation into practice. So keeping all those in mind. The look for document, thank you for lifting that. It goes back to like our goal setting as well. If they know exactly what they're looking at, and you have a specific focus in mind, then it really helps with the modeling stage.
It's just one more layer about that observation guide, how when you have that debrief, then you have that third point reference, but you also have data from that. And that observation guide is so helpful, so you can really have more of a data-based discussion together around that model. So I just wanted to make sure to put that in the room as well around the data piece.
I love that idea of having a teacher kind of sit with it, depending on what it is, sit with the kids and be a student. Like, we're all here to learn, from Ms. Stahl or whoever it is in the room. And the other thing that I think is really critical is find out what the teacher's already done. I can't tell you how many times coaches have said to me, I went in, I did this lesson, the kids were fine, they did everything. Only to come out and have the teacher say, yeah, I did a lesson just like that last week. That wasn't really what I needed. Okay. So it's really important to get that background information, even if you just have a 10-minute thing, like what have you already done and what are they having trouble with? So I think that modeling certainly is an important part of most coaching cycles. Somebody has the clicker, right? Oh, okay. Okay. So we're going into co-teaching then. Remember yesterday when I was giving some data about coaching cycles, only about 32% of people who sent in coaching cycle reports did any co-teaching. And I think it's difficult because both coaches and teachers really have a lack of knowledge about what co-teaching could be. And some teachers who have knowledge about co-teaching have it because they have co-taught with a special educator. And that may or may not have gone very well. In some cases, the special educator is more of a glorified aide, which really is so disrespectful of all the skills and talents of the special educator who's coming in to support students. In other cases, they've done a great job of co-teaching, but they've used like the parallel teaching model where they break into two groups and each teacher's doing the same thing. So the teacher might think, oh, that's what co-teaching is. Or this teacher's teaching something and the special educator might be teaching a lesson that builds up to the knowledge that the teacher's going to teach that group later. So the idea of what co-teaching when we're talking about it is a little bit different than maybe some people have. So the idea is that I as a we're co-planning a lesson. And you can use that same lesson plan sheet that you have. Just let me tell you, the second part is anxiety around having the coach observe the teacher in action. Even though you're co-teaching, I'm right next to you doing something, and I'm obviously observing what you're doing. So there is some anxiety about that. So how are we going to deal with that? So you want to have this clear definition and a careful preparation of the co-taught lesson. And so in your lesson plan, as you're doing it, you're saying to the teacher, which parts of this lesson should I do and which parts should you do? And typically, you want the teacher to do the parts of the lesson with which she is most familiar and feels most comfortable. And you're doing the new parts of the lesson. And I'm always thinking about, in a coaching cycle, you're using that gradual release of responsibility where, let's say you're doing character traits with students. And the first thing you always have to do is that explicit explanation. What is a character trait? Why are they important when we read? When are we going to really look for character traits? What's the strategy that we're going to use as we go through this novel and discuss, or novel or short story or whatever you're doing? What's the strategy that we're going to use? What's the diagram that we're going to use to collect character traits? All of that is explicit explanation. And as a coach, I might do that in a modeling session because that is something that teachers typically do not do. They say, we're going to work on character traits, and we're going to use this document to do it, and that's it. But they don't talk about what is a character trait? Why are they important in moving the story along? When are we going to be stopping to look at character traits? All of those kinds of things. Why is it important when you're reading on your own to have this knowledge about character traits? And so the first day I might be doing that as a coach, and the teacher's listening in that lesson, whatever, I don't know what else we might do in that lesson, but the second day when we're starting to maybe read and start thinking about character traits, the teacher might be doing a review of that explicit explanation. I think that might fit into shadowing with Jill Jackson, maybe. I'm not really a Jill Jackson expert, so I'm not sure. So that's why I was looking at Suzy. So that the second day, at the very beginning of the lesson, the teacher is doing a quick review of why we're doing character traits. Remember yesterday we talked about this, but got to have it again. And the teacher's already heard it. So the teacher can put it into her own style of language. Maybe she saw places where the students looked a little bit confused, and they can review that. And then the coach can go on into the second part of the lesson that the teacher, whatever they planned, that was less familiar to the teacher, and so on and so forth. So the next day the teacher's doing something that maybe she's seen the teacher do during co-teaching, and maybe they up the ante a little bit and rework it a little bit. So I think that it's the preparation of those co-taught lessons that's really important, and having the teacher say, I'm ready to do this part, or I'd really like to see how you do that part. And that's fine. I mean, because you're collaborating and deciding it. The other thing that really helps is to explain to the students, why are two of you teaching us? You know, we've had one teacher all year. Now, we have, in one of the schools in which I work, we have a huge co-teaching with special educators and regular educators, and we move the special educators' desks right into the room. All letters that go home to the parents are signed by both people, and we really carefully explain all of that to the parents and to the students. But sometimes when you're starting a coaching cycle and it's going to go 4 or 5 weeks and you're going to see this coach in your room every day, it's really important to say, we're working together and we are going to bring our best ideas, and you know what, you're all going to work with us too. And so we're both teachers in this room at this time. So I think it's really important to explain that. And that really, I think, helps set the stage for we're going to learn equally from both of you. Is anybody co-taught very much? Oh, look at this back table. Anybody who hasn't talked that has something they can add? You said no. Ah. I'm not volunteering to talk. Did you had your hand up, right? Are you willing to share just one idea?
I think focusing in on the how to explain co-teaching to students of just I was working with some newer teachers, and being able for to have the students know that their classroom teacher is a learner just like they are as well. And so I'm learning from her and she's learning from me, and we're all learning from each other, because going back to our poster yesterday of our why is our kids. So I think I'm very passionate about letting our students know what our reasoning is, and they're little humans just like we're adults, and that is essential for them to know why we're in their classroom, to learn together and grow together.
Somebody else? Just before I move forward?
So same thing basically that you were just saying, is that it really does create a nice partnership, and both of you are being vulnerable, so the kids can see you kind of playing off of each other and taking turns, which is really nice for students to see how adults can interact that way too. And the debriefing conversations seem a lot more collaborative, because we were both taking part in the teaching, and I can reflect on my own teaching as well as, you know, the teacher's teaching, and she can reflect on mine as well. So
really excellent point about both of you being vulnerable. I think the other thing is that we as coaches going into classrooms like that have to remember, okay, what is the discipline style of, not discipline, what are the behavior management styles of the teachers in those classrooms, and that we want to mirror those styles. And so one day we're doing it this way and one day we're doing it that way, but we don't want to have a difference in student engagement, collaboration styles necessarily, unless you've decided to model a new student engagement style. So that's co-teaching. I hope that people will really think about that carefully, because it is really powerful and can ease the teacher into the next stage about observation. So again, that anxiety of having the coach observe the teacher implement a relatively new practice, and that's why we were saying maybe allow the teacher to do some of those lessons on her own before you observe him or her. And a lack of focus for the observation is another thing, is that if you don't sit down and target the look-fors for the coach could come to that conference with a list of 10 things they want to talk to the teacher about. It's really not what they want to talk to the teacher about. So if you and the teacher have agreed that we're going to look for this, when I'm observing, I'm looking for this, or I'm looking at these 3 students. I'm not looking at anybody else, because you're concerned about these 3 students. So that's what I'm going to collect data about. So whatever it is that you agree to do. So let's look at how we're going to fix that. Using that gradual release of responsibility, I think you have to have done some of those other activities, modeling, co-teaching, co-planning. You just can't start necessarily with observation. And you want to co-plan the lesson that's going to be observed first, and make sure that the teacher knows that this lesson that we've co-planned together is what you're going to observe, or later on, be sure you co-planned the lesson, and then stick to the plan. So yes, I'm just observing for these 3 students. Then I get into the conference and I say, oh, by the way, I was wondering about, no, you might have those little notes over here that you're going to think about later. You're not going to talk about them now. What you're going to talk about is those 3 students that I've really been observing, and that was our look for, and that's all we're talking about in this conference. That's one way you can get those conferences short into 15 or 20 minutes, by just sticking to the look-fors. And there's a template on some page in No More Random Acts of Literacy Coaching too, about conferencing after an observation. So these are just some of the, what? 64? 64. So these are just some of the things that we were thinking of. We're hoping that they're helpful to you in terms of how you can overcome some of those observations. Do you want to just move forward to the end? And what we would like you to do tomorrow is remember to bring both of those documents with you when you come first thing in the morning. And if you have any colleagues that you think would benefit from these documents, we have some extras up here if you want to pick them up on the way out. So tomorrow when you come, we're going to start here in the morning, I think at 8:30. And we will continue on with coaching. We're going to look at possible styles of coaching cycles. We're going to try to have your colleagues help you answer some of these questions and build a plan for the fall. So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Of course, you can always reflect on your day's session as you have a glass of wine. Especially what brought joy to you today. So we look forward to seeing you again in the morning.